Welcome to our second week of Life Groups. Thank you for just joining with us again. Looking forward to a great season, lots of fun. Just appreciate you pouring into the congregation, the people in your group. It's just a great blessing. And thanks for tuning into this video. We just want to go over a few things to help possibly encourage you and to think of some points of application with your group. I was just really struck with the fact that Joseph was in prison at all. He's in a place where God was going to use him and prove him. And just think, how many people in your group will be in their so-called prison, in a seemingly unredeemable place. It's so easy to forget that God uses all things. Romans 8:28, right? God's using all these things. God's working. God moves in all things, in all situations. But the problem is that it's so humbling to realize you need to be further prepared, which was our first point, this idea that Joseph needed to be further prepared, that prison was a place where God would continue, as it were, to put iron into his soul. And so, you can just talk about that. Maybe you could look in the past. How has God placed iron in your soul in past prison experiences, in past times of adversity and stress? Because when we look in the back, it encourages us for the future. We say, all right, God was faithful then, he'll be faithful now. So you think about that. Another kind of thing, lesson that Joseph learned while he was in prison was the fact that the Father was present. The Father's presence was there. In the verses we read that Joseph was there in the prison, the next verse, but the Lord was with Joseph. What a tremendous truth to grab a hold of, that wherever you are, no matter what your state, highs and lows, ins and outs, God is with you. I'm reminded about Moses in Exodus 32 or 33. Moses is talking to God and he says, hey God, if your presence does not go with us, then don't take us from this land. The presence of God was such a tremendous value and worth to Moses and the people of Israel that they didn't want to go anywhere unless God went with them. And we have this picture of the cloud going before them, and the pillar of night guiding them, the pillar of fire at night guiding them. They only moved when God was with them. And I think for us, I don't just know if that's the case. How often in life do we go before God, or are we not even aware of his presence, or maybe we don't even care? Like, it's not that big of a deal. If God's with me, he's not with me, no big deal. That shouldn't be the case for the believer. The Father's presence should just encourage you, and those 3 points should give you peace, right? That the presence of the Father allows you to have peace in the tumultuous situation. We used the example in Mark where the disciples were in the boat and the wave and the storms were coming crazy and Jesus was asleep. The presence of Jesus should have given the disciples peace, but it didn't. They didn't recognize it. To them, the storm was greater than the presence of Jesus. So how can we maybe get that reversed sometimes? You could maybe talk about that a little bit. Talk about the power. The Father's presence gives us power. And I'm reading a book right now by Alan Radpath, The Making of a Man of God. And he points out the greatest difference between Saul and David was that the spirit departed from Saul and the spirit was with David. And that was like the biggest difference between those two men. God was with David, God was not with Saul. And so it makes sense when we see Saul, this distressing spirit come upon him, when we see Saul cowering in his tent, when we see Saul just angry and jealous and raging. In contrast, David, a man of peace, of principle, of courage, approaching Goliath with strength. Just great pictures there of what the presence of God is like in power. And a great challenge for your life groups is the idea of the presence of the Father should also be perceivable. Right? Joseph was recognized as a man that God was with. How are you recognized? How do people perceive you? Do they perceive you as a man or woman of faith and of integrity, a man or woman that God is with? And if not, why not? Right? If those around you don't perceive the Spirit's, Father's presence in your life, why is that the case? Because certainly it's not that God is not with you. Maybe you're just living like He's not. And so you can talk about that. Is there areas of compromise, areas of just where you're allowing the light of Christ to be very dim in your life? And the other point that, of course, if you watch the message or hear on Sunday, just rocked me, was this idea of the presence of the Father should also be a blessing to help others be better. Right? Are your neighbors better off because you live next door? Right? Is your son or daughter's soccer team better off because they're on the team? Not just talking about because they're a better soccer player, but because just the love and life of Jesus is present on the team. Right? That was a challenge. Talk about that. You could talk about maybe practical ways to be a blessing to those around. In fact, in a few weeks, we're going to talk about, as our Easter promotion, we're going to be making this Easter basket. And really the idea is that, hey, make a basket that would bless your neighbor. Don't just hand them an invitation to Easter. Make a little Easter basket, put some fun candy in it, put an invitation to Easter in it, and present it as a blessing to your neighbor, to your friends. So think about that. And then, kind of finally, this idea of the placing faith in the plan of God, which, that's just so incredible to think about how Joseph in prison was able to just really have faith that God was working out a masterful plan. And we don't see Joseph getting angry. We don't see him sulking. We don't see him just sitting in the corner, playing a little violin, being super sad. No, he went to work. He engaged. He didn't get enraged. He embraced the place where he was at. So you can talk about that with your life group. What are ways where we can get engaged in the place that we're at? Instead of just, sticking it out, how can we wring it out? How can we make the most of every opportunity that God has us in? Maybe again, you can look in the past, how in the past God allowed you to make the most of a situation that gives you kind of hope and perseverance for a current situation. Maybe it's a great prayer point, that there's people, I'm sure in your life group, facing adversity, facing tough times. And you can help them, okay, how can we embrace the place God has you? Joseph all along moved from these different positions, constantly being a man of principle and beautiful integrity, because I believe he placed faith in God's plan for him. And God had given him this dream, and that allowed him to, even though it didn't happen in his timing, it allowed him to fix onto that. Say, okay, God, you're going to use me at some point, and maybe it's not at this point, but I believe you will at some point. And so I'll wait until you think I'm ready, which is hard lesson to hear. So praying for you, life groups. I just believe, again, this is a vital part of our church. We always say it's how we make a big church small. So thank you for your hard work. Thank you for your perseverance. I pray a blessing upon your life group this week.